You had people around you, people you trusted, people you assumed would walk with you through everything. And then, without warning or explanation, they started pulling away. Conversations that once lasted hours became shallow and awkward. Invitations stopped coming. Phone calls went unanswered. And the worst part was not the silence. The worst part was the confusion. You kept asking yourself what you did wrong. You replayed every conversation. You searched for the offense, the mistake, the moment you must have crossed some invisible line. But you could not find it, because it was never about something you did. There is a hidden spiritual reason God allows certain friendships to dissolve in the lives of those He is drawing closer to Himself. And until you understand that reason, you will keep blaming yourself for a wound that was actually a surgery. What I am about to explain will reframe every painful departure you have experienced, and it will show you something about your own soul that most people never discover until it is too late. There is a principle in the spiritual life that most Catholics never hear articulated clearly, yet it governs almost everything that happens to them once they begin pursuing holiness in earnest. The principle is this: God, in His providence, arranges the external circumstances of your life to match the internal work He is doing in your soul. When He is refining something deep within you, He will often alter everything around you to support that refinement. And one of the most common ways He does this is by removing people. Not all people, specific people. The ones whose presence in your life, however pleasant it may feel, is quietly obstructing the work of grace. Now, most people assume that if a friendship feels good, it must be good. If someone makes you laugh, makes you feel accepted, gives you a sense of belonging, then that person must be part of God's plan for your life. But this assumption reveals a deep confusion between natural consolation and supernatural fruitfulness. A friendship can console you naturally while starving you supernaturally. It can make you feel comfortable while keeping you spiritually asleep. And this is precisely the kind of friendship God targets first when He begins the serious work of sanctification. Think of your soul as a fortress. Every fortress has walls, gates, watchtowers, and guards. But it also has rooms inside that are meant for the king alone. When God begins drawing a soul closer to Himself, He is essentially moving deeper into the interior rooms of that fortress. He is claiming territory. He is establishing His reign not just in the outer courts of your behavior, but in the innermost chambers of your desires, your attachments, your identity. And as He moves inward, He finds things that do not belong. Furniture that was placed there by the world, decorations hung by vanity, and people who were given keys they should never have held. This is not a cruel process. It is a merciful one, but it does not feel merciful when it is happening. Let me explain the spiritual mechanism more precisely. In Catholic theology, we recognize that the soul has both an intellect and a will. The intellect is ordered toward truth. The will is ordered toward the good. When these two faculties are functioning properly, they are directed toward God, who is the highest truth and the supreme good. But when a human relationship begins to occupy a disordered place in the soul, something subtle happens. The will begins to orient itself not toward God as its primary good, but toward the person. And the intellect begins to filter truth, not through the teaching of the church or the light of faith, but through the opinions, expectations, and approval of that person. You may not even notice this happening. That is what makes it so dangerous. The shift is gradual. One day you realize you care more about what a certain friend thinks of your decisions than what God thinks. One day you notice that you alter your behavior not because the Holy Spirit convicted you, but because you fear the reaction of someone you admire. One day you catch yourself avoiding prayer, avoiding confession, avoiding the difficult interior work God is asking of you because the people around you have made comfort and ease seem like the normal Christian life. And that is the moment God intervenes. He does not remove that person to punish you. He removes that person to free you. There is a vast difference between the two, and confusing them is one of the most common spiritual errors a soul can make. St. John of the Cross wrote extensively about what he called the passive purifications. These are not things the soul does to itself. These are things God does to the soul. The soul does not choose them, does not initiate them, and often does not understand them while they are happening. One of the most painful passive purifications is the stripping of human consolation. God allows the soul to lose the people, the relationships, the social structures that it had been leaning on instead of leaning fully on Him. Now here is where the misconception runs deepest. Many Catholics believe that spiritual growth is primarily about adding things, adding prayers, adding devotions, adding knowledge. And yes, those things matter, but the deeper movements of the spiritual life are almost always about subtraction. God removes before He fills, He empties before He pours, He strips before He clothes. And nowhere is this more acutely felt than in the area of human relationships. Ask yourself something honestly. When you lost that friend, that group, that community, what was your first reaction? Was it to run to God? Or was it to run to another person? Was it to fall on your knees and ask the Lord what He was teaching you? Or was it to pick up your phone and seek validation from someone else? Your honest answer to that question reveals something profound about the state of your soul. It reveals where your dependency truly lies. And this is exactly what God is trying to expose. He is not being harsh. He is being a physician. A good doctor does not simply manage symptoms. A good doctor identifies the root cause of the disease and treats it, even when the treatment is painful. Your over-attachment to human approval, your emotional dependency on a particular friendship, your inability to feel at peace unless someone is affirming you. These are not minor personality quirks. In the language of Catholic moral theology, these are disordered attachments. And disordered attachments are the single greatest obstacle to union with God outside of mortal sin. Let me say that again because it is critical. Disordered attachments are the single greatest obstacle to union with God outside of mortal sin. Not because the people are bad, not because the friendships were sinful, but because the place those relationships occupied in your soul belong to God alone. And anything that sits in God's seat becomes an idol, no matter how innocent it appears on the surface. This is why so many devout Catholics experience a season of intense loneliness right around the time they begin taking their spiritual life seriously. They start praying the rosary daily. They begin going to confession more frequently. They develop a devotion to the Eucharist. They start reading the saints, and then, almost as if on cue, their social world begins to collapse. Friends drift. Family members grow distant. Invitations dry up, and the soul, confused and aching, wonders whether it made a mistake, whether all this effort toward holiness has somehow backfired. It has not backfired. It has worked. The very fact that you are experiencing this pruning is evidence that grace is active in your life. Dead branches are not pruned. Only living ones are. If God is cutting things away from you, it is because you are growing, and He needs to redirect the energy of your soul away from fruitless attachments and toward the one attachment that will bear eternal fruit, union with Him. Our Lord said it plainly in the Gospel of John. Every branch that bears fruit He prunes, so that it may bear more fruit. Notice He did not say every branch that fails. He said every branch that bears fruit. The pruning happens not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are doing something right, and God sees the potential for more. But there is another dimension to this that most people miss entirely, and it concerns the spiritual danger that certain friendships pose without anyone realizing it. In the tradition of Catholic spiritual warfare, there is a well-documented principle that the enemy often uses human relationships as channels of influence, not in some dramatic Hollywood sense, not through possession or overt demonic attack, but through something far more subtle and far more effective: spiritual contamination through proximity. Every person carries a spiritual atmosphere. This is not New Age language. This is basic Catholic anthropology. A person in the state of grace radiates something. A person steeped in habitual sin radiates something else. A person consumed by envy, bitterness, pride, or worldliness does not keep those vices sealed inside their own soul. Those dispositions leak outward. They affect conversations. They affect the emotional tone of interactions. They shape what topics are discussed and what topics are avoided. And over time, if you spend enough time in close proximity to someone whose interior life is disordered, their disorder begins to normalize in your own mind. This is how many souls lose ground without ever committing a dramatic sin. They do not fall off a cliff. They are slowly walked down a gentle slope by companions who are already at the bottom and do not realize it. God sees this. You do not. That is the difference between His perspective and yours. You see the friendship from the inside. You see the laughter, the shared memories, the comfort. God sees the trajectory. He sees where the friendship is slowly leading your soul. And because He loves you with a love that prioritizes your eternity over your temporary comfort, He acts. He separates. He removes. He allows the rupture because the alternative, allowing you to continue drifting imperceptibly away from Him, is far worse than the pain of losing a friend. St. Thomas Aquinas made an important distinction that applies directly here. He distinguished between apparent goods and real goods. An apparent good is something that looks beneficial on the surface, but ultimately leads the soul away from its final end. A real good is something that genuinely orders the soul toward God, even if it does not feel pleasant in the moment. Many friendships fall into the category of apparent goods. They appear to serve you, they appear to bring you joy, but when examined under the light of faith, they are actually keeping you in a state of mediocrity, preventing you from reaching the depths of prayer, sacrifice, and virtue that God is calling you to. And here is the part that stings. Sometimes the people God removes are not bad people. Sometimes they are good people, kind people, people who love you in the only way they know how. But their love, however sincere, operates at a natural level. And God is calling you to a supernatural level. Their ceiling has become your ceiling. Their understanding of the spiritual life has become the boundary of your understanding. And as long as you remain within that boundary, you will never discover what lies beyond it. This is one of the loneliest truths in all of Catholic spirituality. The higher God calls you, the fewer people can walk with you, not because those people are unworthy, but because the path narrows. Our Lord Himself said it. Narrow is the gate and difficult is the way that leads to life, and few find it. He was not being exclusive. He was being honest. The deeper regions of the spiritual life are not crowded. They are quiet. They are sparse. And the soul that enters them must be prepared to walk long stretches with no companion but Christ. Think about the lives of the saints. Almost without exception, the men and women who achieved the highest levels of sanctity went through brutal seasons of isolation. Saint John of the Cross was imprisoned by his own religious brothers. Saint Padre Pio was forbidden from celebrating Mass publicly and placed under severe restrictions by his superiors. Saint Faustina was doubted, mocked, and dismissed by those closest to her. Saint Therese of Lisieux suffered in obscurity within her own convent, misunderstood by many of the sisters around her. These were not random misfortunes. These were surgical operations of divine providence. designed to strip the soul of every support except God Himself. And the purpose was always the same: to create a soul so utterly dependent on God that it becomes a pure channel of His grace. You see, as long as you have a human crutch, you will lean on it. That is simply how the human psyche works. The will naturally gravitates toward the easiest source of comfort. If a friend is available, you will call the friend before you call on God. If a group makes you feel accepted, you will seek their acceptance before you seek God's. This is not because you are faithless, it is because you are human. And God, who knows your humanity better than you do, removes the crutch so that when you reach out, the only hand you find is His. There is a passage in the book of Hosea that illuminates this beautifully. God says through the prophet, "I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her." Notice the sequence. God allures. Then He brings the soul into the wilderness. Then He speaks. The wilderness comes before the tender voice. The isolation comes before the intimacy. God does not speak His deepest words in a crowded room. He speaks them in the desert, and He engineers the desert by removing the crowds. If you are in that desert right now, if you have lost friends and you do not understand why, if your social world has contracted and your loneliness feels unbearable, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not being abandoned. You are being positioned. God is creating the conditions in which He can speak to you in a way that would be impossible if those people were still around. But let me press further into something that requires tremendous honesty, because there is a dimension of this process that involves not just what God is doing, but what He is revealing about the friendships themselves. Sometimes God removes friends from your life because those friends were never truly your friends to begin with. They were companions of convenience. They were associates of shared circumstance. They liked the version of you that was comfortable, agreeable, entertaining, or useful. But the moment you began to change, the moment your priorities shifted, the moment the light of Christ in your life started making their own darkness uncomfortable, they pulled away. Not because you offended them, but because your transformation exposed them. This is one of the most painful revelations a soul can experience, and it is also one of the most liberating. Painful, because it forces you to accept that what you thought was deep and genuine was actually shallow and conditional. Liberating, because it frees you from the burden of maintaining a relationship that was built on a version of you that no longer exists. And this connects to a critical principle of Catholic anthropology. You are not a static being. You are a living soul in the process of becoming. The you who existed 5 years ago is not the you who exists now. Sanctifying grace transforms. The sacraments reshape. Prayer recalibrates. And as you change, the people who were compatible with the old you may not be compatible with the new you. This is not a failure of the friendship. It is evidence of your growth. But the enemy will try to convince you otherwise. One of the most effective strategies of the demonic in the lives of those pursuing holiness is the weaponization of loneliness. The enemy knows that loneliness is one of the most powerful emotional states a human being can experience. It triggers deep survival instincts. It activates primal fears of abandonment. It creates an interior environment that is fertile ground for despair, self-pity, and the temptation to return to old patterns simply because they were familiar. So here is what happens. God removes a friendship because it was obstructing your growth. The enemy immediately floods your mind with thoughts designed to reverse the process. You will never find anyone who understands you. You pushed everyone away. You are too intense. You are too religious. You are becoming a fanatic. Nobody will ever love you the way they did. These thoughts are not from God. They carry the fingerprint of the accuser. And their purpose is singular: to drive you back into the very attachments God just freed you from. Recognizing the source of these thoughts is a critical skill of discernment. The thoughts from God, even when they involve difficult truths, always carry peace at their core. They may be painful, but they are not hopeless. The thoughts from the enemy always carry an undertone of despair, panic, or urgency. They make you feel like you need to act immediately, like you need to fix the situation now, like you cannot survive without that person. That urgency is a red flag. God rarely operates in panic. He operates in patience. So what do? What is the Catholic remedy for the soul that finds itself stripped of companions and standing alone in the wilderness? The first thing you must do is resist the temptation to interpret God's pruning as God's punishment. This distinction is so important that I need to dwell on it. Punishment is retributive. It is a consequence of wrongdoing. Pruning is formative. It is a preparation for greater fruitfulness. When God removes friends from your life, He is not punishing you for being too devout, too zealous, or too committed. He is pruning you because you are bearing fruit, and He wants you to bear more. The moment you begin interpreting the pruning as punishment, you open the door to bitterness, resentment, and the toxic belief that God is cruel. And once that belief takes root, your spiritual life will wither. The second thing you must do is take your loneliness to prayer. Do not take it to social media. Do not take it to distraction. Do not take it to another human being. Take it to the blessed sacrament. Sit before the Eucharist and let the loneliness speak. Let it surface. Let it ache. And then offer it. Say to the Lord, I feel alone. I do not understand what you are doing, but I trust you. This kind of prayer, honest, raw, and surrendered, is more powerful than 1,000 eloquent devotions recited without interior engagement. The third remedy is confession. And this might surprise you. Why confession? Because loneliness often exposes vices that were previously hidden by the noise of social interaction. When the friends leave and the silence settles, you may discover that you are angrier than you realized, more envious than you thought, more dependent on approval than you wanted to admit, more attached to comfort than you knew. These discoveries are gifts. They are not pleasant gifts, but they are gifts because they show you what needs to be healed. Take those revelations to the confessional, name them, confess them, and receive the grace that the sacrament provides to uproot them. The fourth remedy is devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. In every season of isolation, Mary stands as the supreme model and the most reliable companion. She stood at the foot of the cross when almost every other friend of her son had fled. She knows what it means to remain faithful when the crowd disappears. She knows the silence of Holy Saturday, the long hours between the death of hope and the dawn of resurrection. When you pray the rosary in your loneliness, you are not reciting empty words. You are inviting the Mother of God into the very room of your suffering. And she always comes, not with fanfare, not with dramatic apparitions, but with a quiet, interior presence that steadies the soul when everything else is shaking. The fifth remedy, and this is perhaps the most practical, is to begin cultivating what the Catholic tradition calls spiritual friendship. Not all friendship is the same. There are friendships of utility, friendships of pleasure, and friendships of virtue. Aristotle identified these categories in his Ethics, and St. Thomas Aquinas baptized them into Catholic moral theology. Friendships of utility exist because two people are useful to each other. Friendships of pleasure exist because two people enjoy each other's company. Friendships of virtue exist because two people share a common pursuit of the good and help each other grow in holiness. God often removes friendships of utility and pleasure to make room for friendships of virtue. But friendships of virtue are rare. They cannot be manufactured. They cannot be forced. They emerge slowly, often in unexpected circumstances, between souls who are both genuinely pursuing God and who recognize in each other a shared commitment to truth. If God has removed your old companions, He may be preparing you for new ones. But the preparation requires patience. You cannot rush this process any more than you can rush the growth of a tree. Now I want to address something that is rarely discussed, but deeply important. There are cases where God removes friends not primarily for your benefit, but for theirs. This may seem strange, but it is consistent with the logic of providence. Sometimes your presence in another person's life is enabling their spiritual stagnation. You are too kind, too accommodating, too willing to overlook their faults, too ready to provide comfort that prevents them from confronting the interior work God is asking of them. And so God separates you, not because you failed them, but because your very kindness had become an obstacle to their growth. This is a hard teaching. It goes against every instinct of natural affection. But supernatural charity, the charity that God infuses through grace, is not the same as natural affection. Natural affection wants the other person to feel good. Supernatural charity wants the other person to become holy. And sometimes those two goals diverge dramatically. Sometimes the most loving thing God can do for another person is to remove from their life the one person who was making their mediocrity comfortable. If this resonates with you, it may bring a strange peace, because it means the departure of that friend was not a failure on your part. It was an act of divine mercy toward both of you. You needed to grow without them. They needed to grow without you. And the only way to achieve both was the separation you did not choose and still do not fully understand. But there is something else God does through this process that is arguably the most important thing of all. And most souls miss it entirely because they are so focused on the loss that they cannot see the gain. When God strips away your human companions, He expands your capacity to receive Himself. Think about this carefully. Every attachment occupies space in your soul, not physical space, obviously, but spiritual and psychological space. Your heart has a finite capacity for attention, affection, and devotion. When a significant portion of that capacity is directed toward another human being, less is available for God. This is not because God is jealous in a petty sense. It is because He knows that only He can fill the deepest chamber of your heart. Every human being, no matter how loving, no matter how devoted, no matter how saintly, will eventually disappoint you. Not because they are bad, but because they are finite. They cannot be what only God can be. And here is the mystery. The loneliness you feel after God removes a friend is not actually a void. It is an expansion. Your heart is being stretched to hold something greater. The pain you feel is growing pain. It is the ache of a vessel being enlarged to receive more grace, more of God's presence, more of His love. But the enlargement hurts. It always hurts, because the old walls of your heart are being broken down to make room for something the old walls could never contain. Saint Augustine captured this perfectly when he wrote, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." That restlessness you feel in the wake of a lost friendship is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is a sign that your heart is searching for its true home, and every false resting place must be removed so that the search can reach its proper end. There is a story in the Old Testament that illustrates this with stunning clarity. When Gideon was preparing to fight the Midianites, God told him his army was too large. Too large, not too small. Gideon had 32,000 men. God said, "Reduce them." So Gideon sent home the fearful, and 22,000 left. Then God said, "Still too many." Through a second test at the water, God reduced the army to just 300 men, 300 against a force described as being as numerous as locusts. Why did God reduce the army? He gave the reason explicitly. Lest Israel claim glory for itself, saying, "My own power saved me." God wanted it to be unmistakably clear that the victory came from Him, not from human numbers, not from human strategy, not from human companionship. And He achieved this clarity by stripping away everything Gideon was tempted to lean on. God does the same thing in your life. He reduces your circle not to weaken you, but to remove every possible explanation for your victories other than His grace. When you are surrounded by supporters, encouragers, and companions, it is easy to attribute your strength to the network. But when you are alone, truly alone, with no one standing beside you except the invisible God, and you still stand, then both you and the watching world know where your strength comes from. This is the hidden glory of the stripped-down life. It reveals God. But I must give you a warning here, because this truth can be misapplied, and the enemy loves to misapply truth. The fact that God sometimes removes friends does not mean you should preemptively push people away. It does not mean you should become suspicious of every relationship. It does not mean you should weaponize this teaching to justify self-imposed isolation or a refusal to pursue community. The Catholic faith is inherently communal. The Church is a body. The Eucharist is received in community. The sacraments are administered within the context of the Church. God never calls a soul to permanent, total isolation from other believers. What He does call certain souls to in certain seasons is a temporary stripping of natural support so that the supernatural foundation can be strengthened. The key word is temporary. Seasons of loneliness are not meant to be permanent. They are meant to be formative. They are meant to teach you who God is when no one else is around. They are meant to break the chains of human dependency so that when God does bring new people into your life, you relate to them from a position of spiritual freedom rather than desperate need. And this is where the transformation happens, because the friendships that emerge after a season of divine pruning are qualitatively different from the ones that existed before. Before the pruning, your friendships may have been driven by need, insecurity, loneliness, or the desire for validation. After the pruning, if you have cooperated with the grace, your friendships are driven by charity. True charity, the kind that wills the good of the other without demanding anything in return. The kind that can love freely because it does not need the other person to fill a void that only God can fill. This is the hallmark of a spiritually mature friendship. Two people who are both anchored in God, who love each other not because they need each other, but because God has placed them in each other's lives for a shared mission. These friendships are rare, they are precious, and they are worth every ounce of loneliness you had to endure to become capable of them. Saint Erard of Revolx, the great Cistercian monk who wrote extensively on spiritual friendship, described this kind of relationship as one in which Christ is the third party, not a bystander, not an afterthought, the foundation, the animating principle, the reason for the friendship's existence. When Christ is the center, the friendship does not collapse when circumstances change, because its foundation is not circumstance. It is eternal truth. You are being prepared for friendships like that. But the preparation requires the death of the old way of relating, and death always hurts before resurrection comes. Now let me speak to something that may be the most uncomfortable part of this entire teaching, but is also the most necessary. There are certain individuals who repeatedly lose friendships, not because God is pruning them, but because they have unaddressed vices that drive people away. And they use the theology of divine pruning as a cover to avoid examining their own behavior. If you find that people consistently distance themselves from you, it is worth examining whether the pattern is entirely God's doing, or whether there is something in your own character that needs correction. Are you prideful in your speech? Are you judgmental? Are you harsh in your correction of others? Are you so focused on being right that you forget to be kind? Do you monopolize conversations? Do you fail to listen? Do you make every interaction about yourself? These are hard questions. But honest self-examination, guided by the Holy Spirit and the counsel of a good confessor, is essential to distinguish between divine pruning and self-inflicted exile. God prunes fruitful branches, but sometimes the fruit falls off because the branch is infected with pride. And treating an infection as if it were a badge of honor is one of the most dangerous forms of spiritual blindness. So take this teaching to confession. Ask your priest. Ask your spiritual director if you have one. Submit your interpretation of events to the judgment of someone wiser than yourself. Humility demands this, and humility is the soil in which every authentic spiritual friendship is eventually planted. Let me bring this together with one final truth that encompasses everything I have said. God's love for you is not sentimental. It is surgical. It is strategic. It is eternal in its scope and relentless in its pursuit of your highest good. Every person He removes from your life is removed with the same precision with which a master sculptor removes marble from a block. He does not chip randomly. He chips according to a vision. He sees the finished work. He sees the saint you are meant to become. And every strike of the chisel, every loss, every departure, every lonely night, every silent phone is a calculated act of love designed to reveal the image He has been shaping since before you were born. You are not being abandoned. You are being sculpted. Your fortress is not being destroyed. It is being cleared of everything that does not belong so that the King can occupy every room, every corridor, every watchtower. And when that process is complete, when God alone sits on the throne of your heart, you will look back on every lost friendship and see it for what it truly was. Not a wound, not a rejection, not a failure, but a gift, a severe, painful, merciful gift that freed you from settling for bronze when God was forging you for gold. If you are in that season of stripping, hear this. Do not run from it. Do not numb it. Do not try to replace what God has removed. Sit in the silence. Let God speak. Let the Eucharist feed you. Let the Rosary anchor you. Let confession cleanse you. Let the saints encourage you. Let your guardian angel protect you. And trust, even when you cannot see, even when you cannot feel, even when every human comfort has been taken away, trust that the God who began this work in you will bring it to completion. He is not finished. He is not careless. He is not cruel. He is a Father who loves you too much to leave you comfortable in a life that was always meant for more. And if this teaching has opened your eyes to something you had not seen before, if it has given language to a pain you could not articulate, do not keep it to yourself. There is someone in your life right now who is suffering in silence through the same stripping. They think God has forgotten them. They think they have been discarded. Send them this message. Let them know the truth. The fortress is not falling. It is being claimed by the King.